My parents purposefully kicked me from my sister's wedding after an 18-hour flight. 3 days later, they begged me to send them a $38,000 wire. The fairy lights were already on when I pulled up. Hundreds of them, strung through the branches of the old oak trees lining the driveway of Meadow Creek Barn. Mason jars caught the late afternoon sun along the gravel path. The whole place looked like a magazine spread. Warm, glowing, perfect. I sat in my rental car for a minute before getting out. I'd been awake for 22 hours. The flight from London to Atlanta had been delayed 2 hours on the runway. Then I'd missed my connection to Cedar Bluff Regional and ended up driving 3 hours in a car that smelled like someone else's cigarettes. My dress was wrinkled despite the iron I'd used in the hotel room the night before. I'd pressed it for 20 minutes while the local news played on mute. I smoothed it the best I could with my palms and grabbed the gift from the back seat. A Le Creuset Dutch oven, cobalt blue. Brooke had mentioned wanting one exactly twice. Once at Christmas dinner 3 years ago, once in a passing text about a recipe she'd tried, 8 months apart. I'd remembered both times, which is a strange thing to think about now. The precision of what I chose to hold on to. I walked up the gravel path. Guests were streaming in, women in florals and heels, men in linen suits loosened by the June heat. A string quartet was setting up near the entrance, tuning softly, one violinist adjusting a peg with the particular patience of someone who's done it 10,000 times. I recognized one of Brooke's college friends from Instagram, Kayla, I thought her name was, the one with the dark curly hair who'd been in every Bachelorette post, and nodded as we passed each other. She looked through me the way you look through a window when you're focused on something outside. I kept walking. My father saw me from the doorway first. He was standing with a glass of sweet tea, talking to someone I didn't recognize. An older man, ruddy-faced, probably Cole's uncle from Knoxville judging by the UT tie. My father's face changed the way a window fogs, gradual, then complete. He turned around and walked inside without a word, just turned, just walked. Like I was whether he'd decided to wait out. I told myself it didn't mean what I thought it meant. Then my mother stepped out. She was wearing champagne silk. Her hair was done in a way I'd never seen on her. Soft, swept back, elegant. She'd had it set somewhere nice, probably Gina's in Cedar Bluff, the place she went for special occasions and sometimes called My Little Indulgence. She looked beautiful. She looked like someone's mother of the bride. She looked like the woman I had spent 31 years trying to make proud. She looked at me the way you look at a wasp that's flown into your house. What are you doing here? I had rehearsed this moment somewhere over the Atlantic, around the 4th hour of the flight when I couldn't sleep and the cabin had gone quiet and dark around me. I had told myself I would be calm, that I would say something measured and dignified, that I wouldn't give her the reaction she might be bracing for. I'm here for Brooke's wedding, I said. I flew 18 hours, Mom. She didn't blink. You need to leave, now. And then the groom's mother appeared in the doorway behind her. Margaret Caldwell, silver hair, pearl earrings that looked like they'd been in the family since before I was born. The kind of compose that comes from decades of knowing exactly who you are and what you're owed and having no particular need to announce either. She looked between us with careful eyes, taking in my dress, my travel fatigue, the space between my mother and me that was thick with something she couldn't quite name yet. Diane, everything all right out here? My mother turned like a switch had been flipped. Warm, easy, bright, the full performance. Oh, it's nothing, Margaret. Just a distant relative who got the wrong venue. Margaret tilted her head. Something behind her eyes shifted, just slightly, the way a very composed person registers something that doesn't add up without letting it show on their face. I thought you only had one daughter, Diane. My mother laughed, the laugh she uses when she's performing for someone who matters to her. Bright and brittle and practiced over 50 years of being the most charming woman in any room she chose to enter. I do, she said. This is a cousin from out of town, confused about the schedule. She said it while making full eye contact with me. I was holding a $720 gift, standing on a gravel path I had paid for, being called a cousin by the woman who spent 16 hours in labor bringing me into the world. I want to tell you, I felt something dramatic in that moment, rage or devastation, or the kind of hold clarity people describe in crisis. What I actually felt was a strange stillness, like the moment after a car crash before the pain arrives, like my body was waiting to catch up to what my mind already understood. I set the box down on the stone step at the barn entrance. Keep it, I said. It's for Brooke. I turned around. I walked back down the path. I got in the rental car and I sat there while the string quartet started playing something soft and lovely inside the barn I had funded. A Vivaldi piece, I think. Something that sounded like a summer I wasn't invited to. Then I drove away. I don't know why I'm starting there. Probably because that moment is the one I keep returning to. The thing I measured everything else against in the months that followed. Not the anger, not the money, not the legal letters, just that gravel path, just the way she laughed. Let me go back further. I am the firstborn daughter of Diane and Gerald Sinclair of Cedar Bluff, Tennessee. My sister Brooke is 7 years younger than me. She came along when I was in 2nd grade, and from the beginning she occupied a different position in the family than I did. Softer, more cherished, the one everyone softened around. I don't say that bitterly, or not only bitterly. It was just true in the way certain weather is just true. You don't argue with it. You learn to dress for it and you go outside anyway. The dynamic had a shape I could trace early. My mother was stricter with me, held me to something that functioned like a standard. Good grades, composed behavior, don't cause scenes, don't need too much. When I cried, she told me to settle down. When Brooke cried, she pulled her close. I used to tell myself I got the version of my mother that made me stronger. Now I think think I just got a different version. I moved to London at 26 for a marketing position with a distribution company. It was a good opportunity and also, honestly, an exit. The distance gave me room to breathe in a way I hadn't known I needed until I had it. Within 4 years, I was running regional accounts across 3 countries. I called home on Sundays when I remembered to, which wasn't every Sunday. My mother called the time difference inconvenient. My father never learned to use FaceTime right, always talking at a slight angle, like he was addressing someone standing just behind me. I had built a life that was genuinely mine, a flat in Southwark, 3rd floor, with a window that caught the morning light in a way that still made me stop sometimes when I came into the kitchen half asleep. A serious relationship with a man named Daniel, a structural engineer who made coffee every morning without being asked and remembered small things I mentioned once. The name of a book I'd said I wanted to read, a restaurant I'd walked past and described. A savings account that had taken a decade to fill, but that I was proud of in the particular way you're proud of something that was hard and entirely your own doing. Brooke, at 24, had gotten engaged to a man named Cole Caldwell. Cole was from Cedar Bluff originally, from what my mother called a very good family, which in Cedar Bluff means they had land and their name on a building somewhere, and people remembered their grandfather fondly. Cole was perfectly fine. I'd met him twice, once at Thanksgiving, once at a brief Christmas visit I'd made 2 years prior. He was easy, a little quiet, seemed genuinely attentive to Brooke in the way that matters. He seemed to love her. That was the main thing. In March, 3 months before the wedding, my phone rang at 7 in the morning London time. My mother, Athena honey voice. The voice she used when she wanted something. I'd been hearing it my whole life. A specific warmth that arrived with requests and departed when they'd been granted. We've run into a little snag with some of the vendor contracts for the wedding. I sat up in bed. Daniel was still asleep beside me. I took the phone to the kitchen. What kind of snag? Well, your father's credit isn't what it used to be. You know how it's been since the shop. The shop was a hardware business my father had operated for 11 years and sold at a loss 4 years earlier when the big box store opened on Route 9. It was a wound the family was still pressing at the edges, checking whether it had healed. The barn and some of the vendors need a credit check to hold the date, and we just need someone with good standing to put their name on the paperwork. Mom, it's just paperwork, Athena. It's not like they're going to charge you anything. It's just your name for the contracts. Brooke just graduated. She and Cole are just starting out. You'd be doing your sister a huge favor. Like I was lending a sweater, not putting my financial future on the line for a party I hadn't been consulted on. I was quiet for a moment. How much are we talking about? Oh, it's nothing dramatic. The venue, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer, everything's already been chosen. We just need someone with good credit to sign. I asked for the numbers. She gave them to me in a way designed to make them hard to add up. The venue cost mentioned first, but framed as a deposit. The catering listed as a per-head estimate rather than a total. The flowers described vaguely as a few thousand. I did the math myself later, alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold. It came to $41,000. I told her I needed to think about it. Of course, she said. Take the weekend. The barn just needs confirmation by Monday. I talked to Daniel that evening. He listened, then said carefully, "That's a lot of exposure, Athena. Your name is the one attached if anything goes wrong." He wasn't telling me not to do it. He was making sure I understood what I was agreeing to. He was right. I understood. I called Mom back Sunday night and said yes, because that is what I had always done. Because I had spent 31 years saying yes to the things that positioned me as helpful and reliable, and I had never once been rewarded for it with the thing I actually wanted, to be treated as if I belonged. I said yes and told myself this time would be different, that the gesture would land, that it would open something. The contracts arrived by email over the next 4 days. Meadow Creek Barn, $14,800. Caterer, Cedar Ridge Table, $12,600. Florist, Bloom & Co., $6,200. Photographer, Marcus Ashby Photography, $4,400. A string quartet, $3,000. Total with gratuity deposits already collected, just over $41,000. My name, my card, my signature at the bottom of every page. I read each contract carefully, which I think was the only smart thing I did in this entire episode. I noticed that the final payment dates were structured to fall the Thursday after the wedding, which meant the vendors would be paid after services rendered. I filed that away without knowing yet why it would matter. I sent everything back, put the card on file. Then I waited to be included in the wedding. The group chat I found out about by accident. Brooke had added her 4 bridesmaids, 2 college friends, 1 childhood friend from Cedar Bluff, and our cousin Tara on my father's side, to a thread to vote on bachelorette party locations. She accidentally forwarded it to me instead of one of the others. The message said, "Vote ladies, Nashville or Savannah." I was not in the thread. I replied to the forward and said it looked like she'd sent it to the wrong person. She replied, "Ha, sorry sis." Nothing else. No invitation into the thread. No, obviously you're included. Just, "Ha, sorry," and silence. I told myself the bridesmaids had probably already been chosen before the contracts conversation, that it was awkward to change things mid-planning, that I was reading into it. The rehearsal dinner I saw on Instagram. My mother had posted a carousel of 12 photos. Brooke in a white sundress, glowing, holding a glass of champagne like she'd been born for the moment, and she had, in some ways, been raised for it. Cole's arm around her. My parents beaming on either side. Cole's parents, the Caldwells, looking polished and warm and completely at ease. The extended Caldwell family filling the rest of the frame. The caption read, said, my whole family, my whole world. Tomorrow, we celebrate our baby girl. I was not in a single frame. I was not in that whole world. I stared at that caption for a long time. I read it the way you read something a second and third time when you're certain you've missed a word that would change its meaning. I hadn't missed anything. I should have stopped there. I should have called her. I should have done the direct thing that the version of me I want to be would have done. Instead, I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I'd been misreading the family dynamic since I was a teenager. That distance had warped my perception. That of course I was included. That you don't uninvite family. That she was my mother, not a stranger. I booked the flights. Spent $2,800 getting there. I booked a hotel in the next town over because no one had offered me a place to stay and I hadn't wanted to ask. The week I was flying to Tennessee, my mother called once. She asked if I'd confirmed the final balance schedule with the vendors because they'd been emailing. I told her the balances were due the Thursday after the wedding, per the contract terms. She said perfect, and immediately moved on to talking about Brooke's hair appointment and whether the outdoor ceremony would be too hot for her elderly aunt from Chattanooga. She did not mention my attendance. She did not ask about my flight. She did not ask if I needed a place to stay or a ride from the airport or whether I wanted to see her before the day itself. I ironed my dress the night before on the little board attached to the hotel closet door. I watched local news I couldn't track because I was too tired and too far inside my own head, running through scenarios I kept shutting down. I wrapped the gift with paper I'd bought at a CVS down the street. I lay in bed until 1 in the morning. Then I slept badly and woke at 6 with that particular exhaustion that comes from sleeping through anxiety rather than past it. And you know what happened at the barn. When I got back to my hotel room after leaving the gravel path, I sat on the bed in my dress for a long time. I didn't cry. I think I was past the place where tears are the right response. What I felt instead was something structural, like a load-bearing wall in my understanding of my own family had just come down quietly, and I was sitting in the dust of it, and I needed a moment before I could figure out what was still standing. I ordered room service I barely touched. I took a shower, then I opened my laptop and sat at the small hotel desk and read through every vendor email I'd received over the past 3 months. The contracts were all there. My legal name at the bottom of every page. My credit card on file for the final payments due Thursday. $38,000. My name. Their party. I picked up my phone. The barn first. I explained that I would not be authorizing the final payment and asked them to redirect the invoice to the Sinclair family at their Cedar Bluff address. The coordinator, a woman named Jessie, was professional about it. The measured professionalism of someone who has navigated family complications before and learned not to comment. She confirmed the redirect. I thanked her. Cedar Ridge table. The catering manager asked if there was an issue with the service. I told him the service had nothing to do with it and gave him my parents' address. He confirmed. Bloom & Co. The florist was the least professional about it. She made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a laugh, that said she'd seen this particular situation before and had developed a policy of not getting involved. She confirmed. Marcus Ashby. The photographer was the easiest. He thanked me by name and said he hoped the rest of the day improved. I appreciated that more than he knew. 12 minutes total. 4 calls. Then I canceled the card entirely and called the bank to flag for any charges that came through in the next 48 hours. I booked the first available flight back to London, 6 in the morning with a connection in Charlotte. I set my alarm for 4. I got something close to 3 hours of sleep. I was somewhere over the Atlantic again when my mother called the first time. The voicemail she left was the honey voice. Strained around the edges, like honey that's crystallized and needs warming before it flows right. Athena, sweetheart, I got a call from Meadow Creek Barn this morning about the final payment, and there seems to be some kind of mix-up with the account. Can you give me a call when you have a chance, hun? Just want to get it straightened out. Love you. She called again, 2 hours later. No voicemail. Then again 40 minutes after that. I landed at Heathrow, cleared customs, took the Jubilee line to London Bridge, walked to my flat in Southwark, made coffee, stood at my kitchen window and looked at the morning light coming through for a minute. Then I sat down and called her back. Athena. No honey at all now. Just my name. Edges hard. The venue called. The caterer called. What is happening? Nothing unusual, I said. I redirected the invoices to you and Dad. They should be contacting you directly now. Silence. A long one. You, what? Those were in your name. You agreed to handle those. I agreed to put my name on contracts, I said. I didn't agree to be called a cousin in front of a stranger. I didn't agree to be turned away at the door. I didn't agree to be left out of a group chat and a rehearsal dinner and written out of the family in an Instagram caption and then described as a cousin who had the wrong venue. She shifted. The silence changed texture. Athena. Softer now. Calculated softness. The voice that sounds like concern but is actually a tool. Your father's blood pressure has been terrible this week. The stress of the wedding alone has... And now this. This is not the time. You called me a cousin, I said, while looking at me. I was managing a situation. Margaret Caldwell doesn't need to know all of our family's complications. I'm not a complication, I said. I'm your daughter. Your firstborn daughter. The one who flew 18 hours and signed $41,000 worth of contracts and was turned away at the door of the venue she paid for. You're being dramatic. That word. The one she'd been using my whole life to cancel out whatever I was feeling. You're being dramatic. You've always been so sensitive. You make everything harder than it needs to be. $38,000 is due Thursday, I said. My card is canceled. The invoices have your name and Dad's address. You'll need to sort out how you want to handle it. She called me selfish. She said said I was humiliating the family. She dredged up specific kindnesses from years ago and presented them as debts, the way mothers sometimes do when they need currency and have nothing left but the ledger. She said I was making Brooke's wedding about myself. She said if I had just called first, she could have explained. Explained what? I said. What explanation exists for calling your daughter a cousin in front of her sister's wedding guests? She hung up. She called back 40 minutes later. The honey was gone entirely. What was left was something I'd only heard a handful of times in my life. My mother cornered. My mother without a performance available to reach for. It's a particular sound. Low and tight and dangerous. Do you know how humiliating it is to have vendors calling me with invoices where your name is crossed out and mine is written in this town, where people know us? About as humiliating as being called a cousin at your own sister's wedding, I said, in front of the groom's mother, by your own. A pause. Then, I will tell everyone what kind of daughter walks away from her family over money. Go ahead, I said. I'd rather be the daughter you badmouth than the daughter you pretend doesn't exist. She hung up. I thought I knew what I had done. I thought I had protected myself financially and said what needed saying, and that the thing was now contained. Ugly and permanent, but contained. A family rupture of the kind that gets managed in silence, distributed through the usual channels of avoidance and Christmas cards and the occasional tense phone call. I didn't account for my Aunt Ruth. Ruth is my mother's older sister. 3 years between them and a distance far larger than that. My mother calls her difficult. Ruth calls my mother a performer. They are both right. Ruth lives 20 minutes from Cedar Bluff in a farmhouse she's owned since 1987, and she has a real gift for seeing exactly what's happening in any room she walks into, and for being the only person willing to say it out loud. She had been at the wedding. She'd watched the whole exchange from near the barn entrance, seen my mother come outside, watched me set down the box and walk back to my car. She hadn't interfered because she knew it would have given my mother something to redirect toward. She'd let it go, sat through the ceremony and the dinner and smiled at everyone she was supposed to smile at, but she'd kept her wedding program. 3 days after I got back to London, she called me. I want you to know I saw what happened, she said, and I want you to know I've been watching your mother do versions of this your whole life. You're not crazy, you're not dramatic, and you're not alone in having seen it. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I needed someone to say that. I'd been so certain of what I'd witnessed, and so aware that certainty can curdle into obsession when you're alone with it, that hearing it confirmed by someone who'd been standing 10 feet away cracked something open in my chest. There's more you should know, she said. She told me things I hadn't known, or had half known, and filed in that place where you put the things that hurt too much to examine. The way my mother had described me to the Caldwells, going back months, something about a complicated situation, a daughter who had gone abroad and sort of drifted away from the family. The way she had introduced Cole and Brooke to Margaret Caldwell's circle as starting their life with just the two families. The way she had positioned Brooke, deliberately and consistently, as the family's single daughter, not the younger daughter, the only daughter. She had been maintaining that story for almost a year before the wedding. The wedding I signed the contracts for. She needed your credit, Ruth said. She didn't need you. It's a brutal thing to hear about your mother. It's also, when you know it's true, a clarifying one. Ruth had been sitting with the wedding program for 2 days. Margaret Caldwell's home address was printed inside the front cover, the way certain Tennessee families still do for formal weddings, a holdover from an era when the program doubled as a social register. Ruth had looked at that address for 2 days. Then she had called. She told Margaret everything. Who I was, what I had signed, how far I had traveled, what had happened at the door, that I had set down a gift and walked away without raising my voice or making a scene while guests streamed past me into the barn. Ruth said Margaret went silent for a full 10 seconds after she finished. When Margaret spoke, her voice had gone very quiet and very cold in the way of someone who has arrived at a conclusion they don't enjoy. Why would Diane do that? Ruth said. I think you'd have to ask her. But I can tell you that girl flew 18 hours, signed every check, and didn't make a scene when she was turned away. That's more grace than my sister deserves. Margaret thanked her quietly, said she needed to make some calls. Cedar Bluff is a very small town, and the Caldwells have been in it for 4 generations. I know what happened at the Caldwell family dinner that Sunday, because Cole told Brooke, and Brooke, in a move that surprised me then and still does when I think about it, called me. Margaret had raised it at the dinner table, not as an accusation, in the particular devastating way that composed women deploy when they want something acknowledged without having to fight for it, by simply stating facts in sequence and letting the air in the room do the rest. She said, I received a call this week about the wedding, about who signed the vendor contracts, about who was turned away at the door on Saturday. Cole apparently looked at Brooke immediately. Brooke apparently turned a color that Cole later described to her as not good. Margaret said, I understand there is a daughter who was not in the wedding, who paid for the wedding, who flew from London, who I was told on Saturday afternoon was a confused cousin from out of town. My mother had been invited to that dinner. She was sitting at that table. I have tried to picture her face in that moment, and I find I can't quite do it. Not because I lack imagination, but because I think what happened on her face in those seconds was something she would never willingly have shown anyone, and she would have brought it under control before anyone could read it. Margaret turned to her and said very quietly, I was told you only had one daughter, Diane. Brooke said Mom had started to explain, that word again, explain, as if something that deliberate can be explained into a different shape, and that Margaret had raised one hand, barely, just a small gesture, and said, I've raised 3 children. I won't pretend to know the history between you and your daughter, but she deserved to be at that table. You both know that." Then she had picked up her wine glass and said something to Cole's aunt about the flowers, and the dinner had moved on, and my mother had sat there in the wreckage of her own story for the rest of the evening. Cole's father, Robert Caldwell, who had apparently said nothing throughout the entire exchange, had walked my parents to their car at the end of the night. He shook my father's hand. He said quietly, "Gerald, call your daughter." Then he went back inside. Brooke called me from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 days later. I think she went there specifically to have the call in private, the only place she could be in her car without Cole or her new in-laws or my mother nearby. "I didn't know about the contracts," she said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. I didn't know the full amount. Mom told me you'd agreed to help with paperwork, and then she handled it, and I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed. Brooke, I should have. Did you know I wasn't on the guest list?" Long silence. "I thought Mom had sent you an invitation," she said finally. "I thought you weren't coming because of the distance. I thought it was just a logistics thing." "She didn't send one." More silence. "The kind that is really someone holding something. I would have wanted you there," Brooke said. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, the way a voice does when the emotion behind it is real and has been held in too long. I believed her. I do believe her. And also I had spent 31 years watching my younger sister receive a protection she hadn't requested but hadn't refused, and that's a complicated thing to sit with alongside belief. I'm still somewhere inside that complication. I don't expect to get out of it quickly. "I know," I said. "I know you would have." We talked for 45 minutes. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. She told me she'd confronted Mom after the Caldwell dinner, that Mom had cried and made it about herself, which is the thing my mother does with more consistency and skill than anything else in her life, that Mom had said I was punishing the whole family over money, that Mom had said if I'd really wanted to come, I would have called first to confirm. "I told her she owed you an apology," Brooke said. "She said you owed her one first." Of course she did. The money got resolved. Not gracefully, but it got resolved. The Caldwells made it quietly known, in the way that families with 4 generations in a small town make things known, that any outstanding wedding vendors needed to be paid in full before anyone started discussing what had happened and why. Cole had a conversation with my father that I was not party to, but that my father later described to Aunt Ruth as a straightening out. My parents paid the vendors. I didn't ask where the money came from. It wasn't my concern anymore. My mother sent me a text 6 weeks after the wedding. "I hope you know I never meant to hurt you. That's all I want to say." No apology. No accountability. No acknowledgement of the specific thing she had done. Standing on a gravel path and calling me a cousin in front of witnesses without flinching. Just the performance of having reached out, which she could then describe to others as having reached out, as having tried, as being the one who extended the olive branch while I remained distant and unforgiving. I read it twice. I put my phone down. I did not respond. My father called in September. He said, "Your mother and I aren't perfect people." I told him I knew that and had known it for a long time. He said, "I shouldn't have walked away when I saw you at the barn." He said it simply, with no decoration, which is the closest thing to accountability I have ever heard from him. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something true that cost him something to say, and I told him I appreciated it, and I meant it. We talked for 20 minutes. About nothing heavy. The garden he'd been putting in. A rain that had come through and flooded part of the backyard. Whether I was warm enough in London as the fall came on. Small and a little awkward and more than I had expected from him. I'll take it. It's been 14 months since the wedding. Daniel and I are still together. He's been the steadiest part of all of this. Not because he's fixed anything, but because he understands when to ask questions and when to sit quietly and let me work through something at my own pace. We went to Portugal in October. I ate a pastel de nata in a square in Lisbon with the sun on my face and thought about almost nothing, which was the specific kind of rest I hadn't known I was starving for. I talked to Brooke more than I used to. Carefully, with a tentativeness we've both accepted as the new ground between us. Both of us now aware that the earth can give way, that you have to test it before you trust your weight to it. But she's trying. She sends me pictures of their apartment. She asked my opinion on things she didn't used to ask about. She called on my birthday this year, first thing in the morning, which she's never done before. I'm taking it for what it is, which is a beginning. I don't talk to my mother. I've spent a lot of time thinking about whether that's permanent. There are days when the silence feels like relief, clean and necessary, the right shape for what happened. There are days when it feels like grief, not for the relationship we had, but for the one I spent 31 years believing we might eventually have. Most days it feels like both at once. I've come to understand that's just what the truth about certain relationships feels like. You can love someone and still need to stop. The love doesn't cancel the harm. The harm doesn't cancel the love. You just have to hold both things in your hands and figure out how to carry them without them poisoning you. What I keep coming back to is not the money. The money was real and the contracts were real and the financial exposure was genuinely significant and I was right to protect myself. But the money was never what this was about, not at its center. It was the moment on the gravel path, the string quartet tuning inside the barn I had paid for, the fairy lights in the oak trees casting that warm, borrowed light over everything, the gift I had wrapped the night before on a hotel room bed, alone, at 11 at night, hoping it would be enough. The way she looked at me and turned me into someone she didn't know. I had believed, somewhere underneath everything, that I was fighting my way towards something, that if I kept showing up, kept saying yes, kept being useful, kept signing what they needed repeated, signed, and flying when no one invited me, that eventually the door would open, that eventually I'd be let in for real. The barn showed me the door was never going to open from the inside. And standing on that gravel path was the last time I waited for it. I kept the cobalt blue Dutch oven. Brooke told me she'd asked one of the bridesmaids to put it in her car before the ceremony began, before anyone else arrived, so it wouldn't get mixed up with the Caldwell gifts. She mailed it to me 4 months after the wedding, packed carefully, wrapped in layers of brown paper, with a card inside the box that said only, "This was always yours." I made soup in it last Sunday, a long Sunday, gray and cold, the kind of London November that goes dark by 4 in the afternoon. Daniel sat at the kitchen table reading while I cooked, and the whole flat smelled like onions and thyme and something slow building and good. He said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. He says that sometimes, which I know isn't strictly true, but I like that he says it. I told him the secret was patience, low heat, not rushing it, giving the whole thing enough time to come together into something worth eating. He looked up from his book and said that sounded like me. I think he was right. I think it took me 31 years and a barn in Cedar Bluff, Tennessee, to understand that patience isn't the same as waiting. You can be patient and still leave. You can take your time and still know when something is finished. I know now. That's the thing I walked away from Meadow Creek Barn with, alongside nothing else of mine. I know now.